Hi, everyone. My name is Melissa Parks. I have my PhD in clinical and health psychology, and I work as a coach for expats, digital nomads, and other global nomads living around the world. So that's kind of my main thing that I do is provide individual coaching. But next month, I'm going to be embarking on an exciting new adventure, which is I'm going to get trained to become a mindful self-compassion teacher. So in honor of kind of like getting ready for the countdown for that, I've been doing each week a series of Facebook Lives talking about the misconceptions and myths about self-compassion. I already incorporate a lot of self-compassion into the work that I do with clients. And so getting trained to be a teacher is just another way for me to bring this work to a bigger audience. So I'm really excited about that. But unfortunately, there's a lot, well, this part isn't unfortunate. There's a lot of great research out there to show the benefits of self-compassion. But there's still, like, each and every one of us has things that can get in the way of us practicing self-compassion. So today I'm going to talk about one of those misconceptions that tends to come up when people hear about self-compassion. So if you're interested, I have one video where I just introduced the series a little bit. Then last week I filmed a video about the difference between self-compassion and self-pity. So you can go to the video tab on my page and watch that video when you have time. Today what I'm going to talk about is why self-compassion is not a weakness. So unfortunately, that's a misconception that can often get in the way of for people. And I'm going to explain a little bit about why that fear is normal and why that can come up. So one thing I wanted to just go explain first is that there was a study that was published back in 2016, and it was amongst researchers from the US, from Canada, from Germany, and they took a look at what does tend to hold people back from being self-compassionate. And they found something really interesting. What they found was that when they asked people how they would view themselves after treating themselves in a kind or compassionate way, they found that the people who had a lower tendency to be self-compassionate actually said that they would feel stronger and more responsible if they were hard on themselves. So this is actually something that I find as well with clients. So like I said, I work a lot with global nomads. Those are my main clients that I work with. And so often they're going through transitions, and those could be relocation, it could be repatriation, so returning to their home country. It could also be something like the end of a relationship, a divorce, a career change. And what often happens is that we don't treat ourselves with the same kindness that we would treat a friend in those moments. We tend to be really hard on ourselves. So, maybe these clients are saying things like, I should have moved on by now. I should have everything figured out. I shouldn't be feeling so sad. I shouldn't be feeling so anxious. I shouldn't be feeling so lonely. So just really tending to really be hard on themselves. And so I really like self-compassion. I incorporated it a lot. And that's a moment when I would probably bring that up. Like, hey, well, let's talk about self-compassion, or let's go back to that topic. And what happens is that often, so I'm bringing this up about like, this could be a really great tool as you're moving through this difficult moment. But often people are like, oh, self-compassion, that's not for me. I want to be strong through this. And so what happens is that with self-compassion, like I mentioned in last week's video, if you watched it, it means that during hard times, we have to look inward and we have to acknowledge what we're feeling at that moment. And so I think that's a big piece where that kind of strong versus weak thing comes up, is that a lot of us have grown up with messages that tuning into our feelings is weak. And that, maybe the way we've gotten through things is to push those feelings under the rug, or, tell ourselves to just get over it, or it's not that big of a deal. And so it's what we're used to. But a lot of us, like I said, we got unhealthy messages about our emotions growing up. Thankfully, that seems to be shifting. Kids are getting better messages. But, you might have heard things like, stop crying, or I'll give you something to cry about. Don't be such a crybaby. Boys don't cry. All sorts of similar messages like that about feelings, and kind of giving us this impression that our feelings are something we can control, and that there are certain feelings that are bad. And so what ends up happening is that because of that, over the years, we end up just developing this automatic reaction to our feelings when they come up. particularly the uncomfortable feelings. So we feel sad, or we feel nervous, or we feel angry about something, and our instant reaction, well, we just don't even maybe like give it the time of day, or we try to like, you know, push it away, or we try to do something, you know, to change our mindset. And that what ends up happening is it really often ends up invalidating us. The thing is that you'll probably get good feedback. You'll get positive feedback from the world around you for having a little bit of a more tough exterior. And I want to say tough in quotation marks there, because it's not, I don't actually, well, it might be tough. I don't say that's a strong thing for sure. So you'll be seeing maybe, you know, somebody who is tough, who's not affected by things, who gets through things without, you know, water just rolls off your back. But the thing is that human beings, we're not machines, right? We have feelings, we get hurt. So I love Brene Brown. This is the only book of hers that I have in a paper copy, but I have a few of her books in ebook copies as well. And I just love what she has to say about emotions. And one quote that I picked out for today that I really like that's related to this is what she says: we cannot selectively numb emotions. So when we numb painful emotions, we're also numbing positive emotions as well. So, you know, that's an important thing to remember. I don't think most people probably want to be numbing happiness or joy or excitement, right? And so, you know, sometimes that reminding my clients of that can be a helpful way for them to say, like, okay, well, maybe I can give the, you know, the self-compassion thing a try. I do really want to emphasize though, like, it makes sense that we want to get rid of feelings that hurt us. So the fear, anxiety, anger, sadness, shame. We're designed to survive, right? Like, that's how, you know, our ancestors like got through life. That's why we're here. We need to be on the lookout for things that can hurt us. So that's true for when things physically hurt us, right? So if you put your hand on a stovetop, it burns your hand, you want to pull it away, right? And that's, you know, really gonna save you and help you. Same thing if you're about to cross the road, you see a car coming, oh, your body, your brain reacts, helps you pull back from a potentially dangerous moment. The problem is we tend to do that same thing when it's emotional harm, emotional pain. And that is where we end up getting into problems. So another thing I like to bring up with clients sometimes is this difference between what is sometimes called like clean versus dirty emotions. So let's say you feel anxious about something. You're feeling anxious maybe about like a public speaking thing that's coming up at work. And you're feeling anxious about it. So what often happens is when we feel anxiety, we tend to judge that anxiety, and we say something to ourselves like, I shouldn't be so anxious, or other people wouldn't be anxious in this moment. What ends up happening is that, so we could call that first anxiety, that's clean anxiety. It's just like our automatic reaction to that moment. And then what happens though is that when we add that judgment on top of it, now we've got that dirty anxiety too. So now we've got, like, it's not just that initial feeling that we could have kind of coped with, we could have soothed, used some self-compassion. Now we have another feeling on top of that. With sadness, sometimes we add shame on top of that. And it just complicates things a lot more and really complicates what we have to work with. So again, important not for us to judge our feelings. What we know from research is that rather than making us weak when we face difficult moments, self-compassion actually is one of our most powerful sources that we can go to for coping. We know that it helps to foster resilience, and resilience is that ability to bounce forward after having some sort of a setback. So I want to touch on another research study that I found that I thought was really interesting. It was out of the University of Arizona, and it looked at whether or not self-compassion could determine how well people adjust to a divorce. And what they found was that when participants displayed more self-compassion when they were talking about the divorce, they also showed better psychological adjustment to the divorce. And an interesting thing was that even 9 months later, that was still true. So what this suggests is that it's not just like what life throws at you, right? It's not just, you know, what the difficult moments are that you go through. It's actually like how you respond to yourself in those difficult moments that helps you to be better adjusted from them. Another thing I wanted to mention is that often when people hear about self-compassion, they tend to only think about kind of the softer side. And sometimes that's where that kind of interpretation of it as being weak gets comes into play. So there is a side of self-compassion that I talked about last week. It's the soothing and nurturing, the comforting. Sometimes we talk about tapping into your inner nurturer. I like inner coach. I think that that's one that can be helpful. But so that piece is called the yin side of self-compassion. But there's also another side too that is kind of being developed more and more, and it's called the yang side of self-compassion. So this is that piece that's more about protecting, providing, motivating ourselves, and also being there for others too. Sometimes it involves actions. You can imagine like this is the kind of that force that's behind social justice issues. It's also kind of, a metaphor I like to think about is like a mama bear that's like defending her cubs in a moment of danger. Or it could be you showing self-compassion in a moment when you notice that like your rights or your needs are being violated and you step up and you say something. So both that yin side and that yang side are really important to cultivate, but sometimes because maybe it's more uncomfortable for people to start with that yang side, thinking about those actions, what is that yang side of self-compassion that I could tap into, can be an easier place for people to start with as well. And so ultimately, really, self-compassion is about finding your inner strength. That's kind of what my take home here. It just might mean that you need to break apart a little bit about what is strong and what is weak for you, right? And where do those things come from? Are those really messages that you want to bring forward, right? Or are those maybe, stories you've been told by your family, by society, and, maybe you want to park them and give something else a try, which, could be self-compassion. I really love working with clients who are a little bit hesitant to try out self-compassion because usually we're able to find a way for them to get on board with it. And then that's just really, really great for me to see. I mean, I love all the research coming out behind it, but it's also really great to see somebody I've been working with one-on-one and have them say, you were right with what you said about self-compassion. I was doubtful, but it's really working well for me. And, maybe they found their own way to do it because it can, of course, be individualized and made to fit what works for you. So I wanted to close today's talk here, today's Facebook Live, with a poem that I was introduced to when I did the self-compassion training last year. And so this is a poem that's called Compassion. And the founders of the course have edited it a little bit to use it for self-compassion. So I'm going to read you the original and then I'll tell you what the one is for self-compassion. So it's called Compassion by Miller Williams. Have compassion for everyone you meet, even if they don't want it. What appears bad manners, an ill temper, or cynicism is always a sign of things no ears have heard, no eyes have seen. You do not know what wars are going on down where the spirit meets the bone. So then again, self-compassion is just about having compassion for ourselves, directing that compassion to ourselves. And so that version of this poem with self-compassion is this: have compassion for yourself, even if you don't want it. What appears bad manners, an ill temper, or cynicism may be a sign of things your ears could no longer hear, your eyes have long since overlooked. You may not know what wars are going on down there where the spirit meets the bone. So I get a little bit of chills hearing that poem. I think it's just really beautiful. I hope that this was able to clarify a little bit of your concerns, if it was a concern for you. What is self-compassion? Is it a weakness? Where does maybe some of that belief that it's a weakness come from? And I would love for you to join with some of your questions. I see a couple of you tuning in live right now. So if you have any questions for me right now, I'd love to answer them. And then also, if you're watching this video later, please post a comment with a question or just an observation or a thought that you have, or send me a message as well. And something I want you to think about too, like I said, sometimes self-compassion, an easier way to start with it is with an action. So maybe thinking about what could you do this week that could be a self-compassionate action. What's something that you would do for a friend? And it can be something small too. Maybe it's just saying to yourself, like, that made me angry when somebody says something to you that hurts you. So sorry for that really loud sound if you hear that right now. I live near a lake where there are some seaplanes going off. But yeah, just thinking about what could be that action that I could take that could really be something that would show some compassion and care for myself this week. So thank you so much for tuning in if you're here live. And then please do tune in next week too, where I'll be presenting the next misconception about self-compassion. Okay, take care. Have a great day wherever in the world you are. Bye-bye.